So I am delighted to introduce the first panel discussion. We will be talking about how can technology convergence make food production and delivery a part of the climate change solution. And if the panelists would like to join me on the stage, that would be great. So to begin, maybe we'll go ahead and have you introduce yourself, a brief introduction, and then we'll get to some questions. Would you like to start, Krijn?
Absolutely. Can you hear me? It's mic is on? Yeah, that sounds good. So I'm Krijn and Nood. I feel a little bit like the odd one out here because there's sort of a lot of AI, machine learning, and we do a different part of tech. We do biotechnology. So what my company tries to do is we make real meat, but without need to slaughter the animal. So what we do is we isolate cells from the animal, but instead of sort of growing the meat in the animal, we take it out, we put the cells in bioreactors, in sort of vats with oxygen there, 37 degrees, nutrients, and if you do that well, the cells start multiplying themselves, and then you get real tasty meat. And that obviously has a lot of advantages in terms of animal welfare, but also climate change, water use, all basically the big problems that we as a species have to battle.
Thank you. Liesbeth, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my mic works. I'm all set. I work for OnePlanet Research Center, and we are an innovation center in chip and digital technologies in agri, food and health. We started 2 years ago. We located here in the Netherlands, in Wageningen, and we are a powerhouse of 3 centers, which is the high-tech innovation center IMEC from Belgium, Wageningen University in Research, powerhouse in agri-food research, and the Radboud University in Research. And we work on digital technology innovations that really enable solving our societal problems in the domains of climate, in the domains of sustainability and health. We have sensor expertise, we have sensor fusion expertise, we have data science and AI on board, really to build novel innovations that really help in these challenges that we stand for.
Thank you. And Michel?
Yes, good afternoon. Michel van der Stappen. I work with Unilever. For those who don't know it, company behind many consumer brands, in my case mostly foods oriented. So I'm in R&D, currently responsible for what we call digital and data, so hence my presence here, but have a history in sort of different roles across R&D, but currently in this area, which sort of spans the spectrum from getting basic data on specifications right all the way up to what the sort of advanced things we can do with all that data, which will probably be more the focus today. So.
Great, thank you. So my first question, with around 80% of a typical consumer company's greenhouse gas emissions originating in supply chain, this is an area that is primed for innovation. What needs to happen to bring that percentage down, initiate more sustainable models, and how can tech help us? Would you like to lead on that one?
Yeah, I would like to start, and I would like to put it a little bit higher, because do you know that 34% of the global greenhouse gases are caused by our current food supply systems, by our food supply chains, 34%. And if we want to bring those down to the levels we need in 2050, according to Paris climate agreements, basically we need to do 2 things. It's not easy, but there are 2 things. That is switch to plant-based diets or climate-neutral meat replacers. Krijn will tell more about that. And the other thing is go towards circular, sustainable food supply chains. And that's what you're asking me about. And in those circular, sustainable food supply chains, tech and digital tech, AI, as we are talking about today, can really be an important enabler, I believe. We can use AI to make supply chains smarter, food supply chains smarter, and we can do a lot more than we do today. So I have this kind of idealistic picture in my head, look in the future, where you have a really data-driven smart supply chain, steered by real-time data from the consumer, coming from a smart kitchen. You get all novel devices being developed, smart fridges with sensors, which can sense the quality of the food. Using that real-time data, combining that with other consumption data and translating that using AI into better prediction so that food production and food delivery can be better steered or can be better balanced. Basically, the kitchen of the future will steer what the consumer, what's being produced. This is, of course, a far future scenario. But if you go back to today, we're really working on this type of innovations, and not only we in our center, but also if I look at Unilever and other food industry, food chains, we're working on those. And one of the examples we are working on is we are developing sensor solutions in the fresh supply chain of fruit, where we can real-time measure and we use AI to predict product quality, and so that we can make, and chain partners can make decisions during the whole food supply chain. And we do that in small chains, but in a lot of chains. And if we do that all in a lot of chains, we can really, digital tech, high tech can really help, yes.
That's great. Do you want to add anything, Michel? Or?
Yeah, no, I can only build on that and confirm what Liesbeth's saying. I think maybe one addition is it's not, I mean, when we say chain or supply chain, I think just to be clear, it means the whole chain, I think, right? It's from growing in fields or even before that right to the end consumers. So I think any part of the chain is only too small to make the impact. The other thing which is yes, it's about more sustainable. It's also about more healthy. So I think it's both these challenges that need to be combined in what we achieve. Because to feed the world in a sustainable way, we also will need more nutritious food from this chain. So it's a big challenge, but yeah, that's what we're up to.
And Krijn, my next question's directed towards you. So biotech is impacting areas including health, pollution, medicine, agriculture. How are advancements in AI and big data impacting biotech when it comes to food management and production?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think maybe sort of taking a step back and why we are doing what we're doing. A couple of numbers. So on every human on Earth, on average, consumes 10 animals a year. So we have about 100 billion land animals, so excluding the fish that we consume. So per human on Earth, it's more than 10 animals. And I think if you let that sort of number sink in, you understand that that's a huge burden, right? So also, in my opinion, there's not per se an overpopulation problem in terms of humans on Earth, but the fact that we eat all those animals because they need a place, they need to be fed, and all that stuff. And then you can imagine, okay, those animals obviously emit greenhouse gases, they use a lot of water, they use a lot of land. So I think on the highest level, that's what we're trying to do. I think if you then think about how biotech and sort of AI is helping, I think how we see it is that it's very difficult to innovate on the animal, right? The animal is the animal, and what are you going to do about it? There are some companies still to look at, hey, can we find certain enzymes that we can put in the feed so that there's fewer CO2 emissions? But in our view, you really need a step change in how you think about meat production, because we believe meat is here to stay. I agree with you, the ideal answer would be, hey, let's all move to a plant-based diet. What we see is that the trend, even though everybody knows the problem, is completely in the different way. Still, meat consumption is on the rise, even in the Netherlands. So I think where is AI and technology helping is really in sort of the precision with which we are able to innovate and make products. So in our case, biology becomes engineering, right? That's a trend that we see. Also, if you look at our investors, they invested in the traditional tech, and now they say, hey, biotech is actually, for the next 20 years, is going to be the new tech, and biology becomes engineering. And I think we use that in terms of our precision on what the cells that we have in our reactors eat and how we can get the right protein expression, the right texture, the right taste. So that's where technology is helping us.
Amazing, and that's actually a good lead-in to my next question. So there's more data for biotech and supply chain than ever before, and this is thanks to things like sensors, IoT, digital twins. And I guess my question is, with this data being used to train AI, how robust is our current data sets? Do we have the quantity and the quality that we need? Are we collecting it from the right places? And is it diverse enough? And how do you see this changing in the future? Michel, do you want to take this one?
Yeah. It's a big question, right? It's a lot of topics, but I think I'd like to start maybe with, is the data there or good enough? I would say so, to be honest. I think certainly looking from my perspective, at times it feels a bit, there's a saying in Dutch, I don't know if it translates, but like mopping the floor with the tap open, so to speak, right? So we have a lot of data, that's true. We increasingly have lots of data. But the reality also is still that we need to spend a lot of time often in curating the data sets, cleaning the data sets, people needing to spend time to get them in the right completeness and quality to actually then build the models or insights to rely on properly. So there is a challenge there, but advances are made rapidly. What we currently see is a number of steps on top of that. First of all, again, speaking from my company perspective, but I hear that a lot, is we increasingly need to connect the various different data sets within a company or even across functions, which is easier said than done. But then, of course, speaking on what we said earlier, with this can only be solving if we look at the whole chain. It's now up to connecting data sets between different partners across the chain. And I think that's really the next challenge. How do we do that? What are our standards? Are we up for it? And it's a little bit of a chaotic field, in my view, still out there. Two things then maybe to build even on top of that is when you say things like digital twins. We should think, and we started some work on that as projects ongoing, it's not about only sharing data between each other. I think it's only increasingly will be about sharing models and digital twins with each other. Yeah, it's a bit like if we now would share factory equipment or pilot plant equipment to do experiments. The same holds for our digital capabilities, which we should be sharing. But there's no real infrastructure or basis to do that in a proper way. And then last not but least, on the quality of the data, I think and Liesbeth probably referred to that already a little bit as well, there is a big need also for new sensors that actually measure the things we want to measure, I would say. So at the moment, we also often see that when we build models or try to work with the data we have data because in the past someone decided that certain things were measured. That's not necessarily the data we need. And especially in food or nutrition, when you want to know things about the quality of food or the nutritional quality of things, you can't really measure these things in an easy way in factories across a chain. So I think there's a few big challenges there which we are addressing, but that will require cooperation across many partners, in my view. Hope that helps.
Yeah, no, that's great. Anything you guys would like to add?
Yeah, I would like to add or build on top of that, because these sensor innovations really to come, that's something that's coming and that's getting there. We are also working on that so that we could really real-time, inline, in the food production, sense product quality in a very detailed level. These are technical innovations that are coming. Those sensors, I expect over the coming years with new technologies will come. But they will deliver new data. And not only these sensors, also other sensors. So we are, for example, working on environment sensing, nitrogen emission sensing, a very actual problem here in the Netherlands now. If citizens can start sensing their own air quality, for example, get those sensors themselves because they become cheaper, etc., then we get that data. So there will come more sensor data. And then we come again on these challenges. how can we make, using AI, how can we make value of those data? So I expect really more data to come, because more sensors and more possibilities to measure will come. And I totally agree with the challenges that you see. I see them also. But I see a lot of potential, and also here in this audience and today in this conference, potential on the AI side to work on that. So I do also a wink-wink with Joel. If you're interested in work on those domains, you can always join us. Yeah.
That's great. I want to dig into those challenges just a little bit more. So when it comes to adopting more sustainable strategies around food production and supply chains, we often hear about costs and regulations and the difficulty monitoring complex systems and the lack of alignment amongst stakeholders. How do you see these challenges being addressed by the industry today, and how might it change in the future? Krijn, do you want to start this one?
Yeah, and again, I think I'm coming from a slightly different angle, but I think in the end, the challenges are similar, right? It's trying to find a simple solution in a very complex world. I think that's the essence. Also, if I look at the regulatory landscape in our case, I think it's taking them along in the innovation. I think that's really important. In our case, to put our product on the market, you have to provide a safety dossier, obviously, and I think there it's really taking the experts at the regulators along and making sure that they understand what you're doing, and also telling the story on why we're doing what we're doing. I think especially with regulators and politicians and consumers, that's really important. And then I do really see the value of the regulators, because I think it's also helpful that there is a third party who says, hey, let's make sure that things are happening in a diligent way.
Yeah, I'm talking about lacking industry collaboration. I must say I see a lot of industry collaboration happening, especially if we want to make those switches towards those circular agri-food supply chains. The chain partners need to collaborate. And I see a lot of projects and programs going on in all specific supply chains or part of supply chains where industry comes together with research, comes together with governments, with NGOs to work on this problem and to really work together. So I think things are really changing, and that is because of the urgency that things need to change.
No, I would agree. I mean, I think personally, I don't think there is a lack of, let's say, alignment between the parties necessarily. It's more that it is a complex challenge, and we're probably all still searching how to address it in the best way. But I think when it comes to the intents, I think there's a lot of synergies in the different parties, what we understand we need to achieve. And also building on what you said, costs maybe briefly. Yeah, I think costs is as always, is one of the constraints to meet. But frankly speaking, it's a constraint now as well, because what we're doing today is also unaffordable increasingly to maintain. So I don't think the new solutions or the alternative solutions we look at necessarily need to be or will be more expensive. We kind of assume that always because there is maybe a very optimized system today that looks cheaper, but that doesn't mean it is inherently cheaper or more affordable in the long run anyway. For example, things if we would tax or cost CO2 in a different way, you would immediately get a very different cost equation for any alternative solutions. So I think all these things need to somehow come together. But I agree with Krijn also. I mean, it's a complex challenge, but we need to find the small nuggets where to start and then get going.
Yes,
absolutely. Thank you all for that. We do have time for some questions. If there's any in the room, just raise your hand. Also, if there's any online, I'm happy to take those as well. There's one in the back there. A microphone's coming your way.
It's online as well.
Hello, I'm Diego, and I have a question both for Krijn and for Michel. It's how long are we into see lab-grown meat at least in a Dutch supermarket? What's the challenge that we need to overcome? And is it going to come from a startup like Meatable or from a giant like Unilever? Thank you.
Interesting. Shall I start?
You're more the expert here. So.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I like the question because I often talk to people and I say what I do, and they say, I know it's already in the supermarket, right? And in the US, everybody's eating it. I'm like, no, I don't think that's the case, because it's really complex what we're doing. So our projections are, and then apart, if you have the production process figured out and scale up, then you need to go through the regulatory approval, which is again sort of 18 months at least. And then you have to realize that, for example, only in a country like the Netherlands, we consume 2 million kilograms of meat a day. So if you just think about, hey, a typical factory will produce 10, maybe 20,000 kilograms a day. The market is so humongous. So we say, hey, we want to be on the market in 2024. That's going to be really small scale. But if you ask me, and that's our ambition and our dream, obviously, sort of when do we have a significant part of the meat market replaced by cultivated meat? I think you're in the next decade, just given the time it takes to build all those factories and to replace some of those billions of animals that I just talked about. I think to the second question, I think we will need each other. I do believe that with such complex innovation, I think it makes sense that there's now several startups trying to actually get that done and get the product to market, get the consumer traction, get the regulatory approval, get the scale-up proof points. But at some point, and I think that also shows from investment, for example, Tyson Food in the sector, DSM, the Dutch food biotech corporate invested in Meatable. So I do think at some point we need to come together and see who owns which part of, who is the most logical owner of which part in the value chain.
Great answer. Thank you. Any more questions? Yep, we have one here.
I have one. Computing and AI and data in the supply chain in the UK, at least, in the past has been used largely to optimize convenience and efficiency and profit at the end of the supply chain, and pushed most of the pressure back to the start of the supply chain in a quite severe way, while reducing a great deal of resilience. It's very efficient, not very resilient, and largely efficient for the end consumer and the big three supermarket firms. How do we move the dial on what technology should be used on in food supply chain so that innovation that occurs isn't just exploited in the same way and makes for a less resilient and less sustainable supply chain?
Yeah, go ahead.
It's a big question, first of all, but I think I agree. I think especially if you probably look at regular commodity supply chains as you describe. However, I also think in the meantime, we all realize that in the end, the impact the food chains make, if I speak, for example, for Unilever, yes, the percentage that we ourselves in our own factories and logistics, etc., make is actually only a very tiny fraction of the total impact the food chain we partly steer makes. So that realization has come now for a long time, I think, and therefore our main emphasis is becoming actually on the agricultural raw materials that in the end sit at the bottom of all these chains, or at the start, you should say, maybe, or at the top. The bottom is maybe not the right way to put it, so to speak, but that's where it all starts and in a way ends when it comes to impact. So that realization has come, which is why all the targets we now have are about regenerative agriculture, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, what have you, across that chain. And I think that is the shift to make. Another element maybe to briefly mention is that what we're also looking in now is how do we get the consumers in the end engaged? Because we haven't discussed about that yet, but at the end of the day, what each of us consumes and buys and eats every day drives this whole thing. It's not us deciding what people eat, it's all of us ourselves deciding what we eat, of course, given affordability ranges. So we're also looking increasingly at saying, how do we get these sort of messages across to consumers such that they can have better informed choices and help in the end to drive the transformation, right?
And there, digital technology and AI can play an important role as well in helping and supporting consumers to make the choices, the right food choices, giving them transparency about their impact, about their footprint. So then we come back to the how
possible, but a big challenge. A nice one though, still. Because there is, for example, intent, and I think we were looking into that. How could you sort of communicate even the greenhouse gas impact, for example, of a specific product when you buy it on the shelf? That's easy to say, that would be nice to have. Well, then there's two big questions. A is, would consumers actually read and bother about it? But also, if you want to put that number on a pack, it's quite a complicated job to get all the data in place to then be able to do that, product by product, given the complexity of our chains, right?
If I could have a follow-on. We're talking a lot about food choice, but it seems to me that some of the optimizations that have gone on recently, mediated by technology, have been about people not preparing their food and people not getting their groceries, frankly. I mean, frankly, wouldn't it be better if people cooked their food and went to the store and picked up their groceries instead of having it brought to them? We talk a lot about last mile optimization, but last mile optimization to me in the real world looks like lots of guys on scooters delivering McDonald's. It doesn't look like people getting food in the way they should, which is walk down to the grocery store and cook it yourself, which is better for you health-wise and also better for the planet. So this is the thing I'm talking about. Technology is being used for optimizing in consumer convenience rather than doing what we want it to. And it's not about food choice, it's about the chain and the fact that nobody cooks their food anymore. They just get it on Deliveroo. So, sorry.
Yeah. We have 1 minute left if somebody wants to comment on that question.
Well, if you refer more of, if I understand it correctly, you're comparing preparing in the kitchen or going out of home. I think the same goes if you buy food out of home. We can use digital technologies also to provide more transparency of the food that you eat in a restaurant or you get when you take it away. So I think the same challenges, as also Michel is saying, go there.
Great. Thank you guys so much. Afraid we're out of time, but you've been a wonderful panel. Please help me thank the panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.